Since they got back, Cadoc's arm had not stopped to ache. It overshadowed the fact that a bandaged wound having cut at his ribs was sore as well. He turned away from his stove, with a teapot in his hand, towards the table where Lillian, Henriette, and the defector hunter Antol sat. He put it down on the plate in the middle, together with the other utilities for tea consumption. He started to prepare his own beverage under silence, making all the little sounds he made feel much louder. No one seemed to be in the mood for tea, and did not follow suit. Both Henriette and Antol stared at the teapot, although with unfocused and distracted eyes. Lillian, on the other hand, frequently shifted her attention to everyone in the room. Having blown on his cup, Cadoc put it down and looked up at Antol.
Well, I've been looking for you for a long time, as you can imagine. And now you're sitting here as a guest. How is that?
Antol quickly met his eyes, but turned away.
Well,
His posture shifted like he had fallen asleep with his eyes open, as if propped up in his chair. The remarkable silence made both ladies turn to look inquisitively at him. Then he blinked himself awake, sighed while rubbing his face with both hands.
oh, I would do anything just to wake up. Or just fall asleep again. I think I would prefer good sleep over this. All of this town. You were hunting your own peers. Was it Is's threat that made you come to your senses? Or did you accomplish that on your own?
He looked at him as if he had not heard him properly. Then he started to smile dumbfoundedly.
Senses. Friend, I went mad long ago. Must have. And you don't wake up from that. No. I know I am condemned to an eternal hunt. That's the only thing I can do. Hunt the mad ones. Perhaps one day there are no one left. One less madman to trouble Yharnam. You seem pretty lucid to me.
He nodded, seemingly finding the statement agreeable, as if someone had never pointed it out.
You have taken people?
Lillian said with a quivering tone, verging on desperate anger. He continued to nod.
Where are they? They're in Yahar'gul. But you won't find them just by going there. Where is that? Never heard of it. It is the Street of Mensis. Or so it was called. Those I know about. Is the Healing Church taking people?
He chuckled deviously.
No. The Church are the most ignorant fools. They must have been occupied with their own secrets to not notice. You can become very occupied by trying to keep your secrets, you know. Enough not to notice what exactly is going on around you.
Caddock leaned back and crossed his arms.
So the School of Mensis have been taking people, and now you've turned to realize it is wrong. Well, might you indulge me with the mad compulsion that kept you from seeing the atrocity of it all?
He made a deep sigh and leaned over the table.
I know. It was not an easy awakening for me. And I don't count myself as lucky. That whole place ought to burn like old Yarnum did. All of it. There is no end to this madness. It can only be done by death.
He became frozen again, blindly staring into the table.
Long ago, the gods came to Mensis.
He looked up at them.
Great, terrible and wonderful. It was a miracle you were forced to believe. Once everyone saw it, there was no going back.
He looked ahead, slightly upwards, as if he saw what he spoke of in that moment, smiling longingly.
That world was different. Everything became so clear. There they were, the great ones. Finally.
He lowered his head, looking terribly ashamed.
So great. The world stopped making sense. Enough to make you turn on humanity?
Henriette scoffed. Caddock gave her an annoyed look, and she leaned back, crossed her arms, but did not lose her contemptuous expression.
I know it. And I wish I never came to. I can't stand it. Help us understand then, so we can at least start to right this mess. Right. It was the Provost Micolash that saw them first. A genius. Like a prophet he was. He could point at thin air and make them appear. Oh, but once he had done so, they would not go away. It was obvious. They had come from the dream. A world beyond our own. A great plain where they lived. They could only have come to show us the way. That's what they said. So, we just had to find the door. The door? Into the dream? Henriette said, leaning forward with more engagement. Yes, we used mirrors at first. You see, the great amygdala is master of the light. It appeared to us in a flash, carried along its current. Our sight lay there, in the grace of the light.
He had started speaking slightly more unnerved, like he was retelling the sighting of a ghost.
You see, when light falls upon the world, that is their power. That's how they touch us. It was ingenious, really. At first, we started casting the light on mirrors. But it had to be properly reflected, you see. And not just any light would do. It had to be conducted properly.
He shook his head and took a deep breath. With a quivering hand, he reached for the teapot and poured himself a cup. He continued speaking while he was fiddling with the tea herbs.
I gather the science of it is not important. Light was the essence, the medium of their will. Or so we thought. And it might have been, for we managed to open up mirrors. They became gates to another place, but a wrong place.
Having prepared his tea, he brought it to his mouth and slurped from the cup.
You entered the dream?
Henriette asked as he put down his cup.
I don't know. We entered somewhere, but it was empty. It was just an endless ocean. Nothing in sight. Except for thousands of spiders.
Henriette looked at Caddock. He thought to gather that she was relieved. After all, they knew one could in fact access the dream, but did not want to give it away.
Spiders? Yes, they repelled us, guardians of the Augur. Also Micolash said, the ocean, you see, is the Augur guarding sleep, the dream, and we touched upon it. We just had to overcome it. We had to cover the mirrors. So, well, after that, the truth became more horrible. Looking at one of the amygdala, you are terrified, but they are so great. You mean they're actual beings dwelling on the Mensis ground, communicating with you? They do not speak. They only watch. But looking upon them, our provost had an epiphany. So simple. Their greatness is not simply in mind, but in body as well.
He maniacally tapped his temple, looking at Caddock, and widened his right eye by pushing back the eyelid with his finger.
Did you know that light influences what we see? Not just the darkness, but what we see. The amygdala is the master of light. It bent it to allow us to see it. Don't you see?
It is our brains that speak the language of light, interpreted through our eyes. That was the key. So pleasingly clear. The door to the dream, to their world, was likely all around us. But we could not see it. The light it shone was not for mankind to see. So, we needed something to produce the correct light. A lens, and lastly, a receiver. Like a mirror, you see? They emit light when it is cast upon them. That's how we see them. And we proved it. The correct light shone back at us as a gateway. Now, what if two brains shone light upon another? What would happen then? Everyone looked at each other with doubtful curiosity. You dream, of course. And then imagine if a great one's brain shone onto me. Where would I end up? In the dream, Caddock said. Him speaking seemed to calm down Antal. He leaned back in his chair and slumped down, as if his words had relieved him of a great weight. Yes. That was our door. A great body was needed to house a great mind. The mind part came later. But first, we needed a host. A lamp. A projector, if you will. Something to host the source of pure light. And of course the brain. For that, Mensis needed people. Lillian stood up hastily and left. Later on, a door slammed as she entered a different room. The blue sparks could revitalize flesh, reanimate it. How wonderful it was in those days. Discovery after discovery. Realizing you hold the power of life within your hands. He smiled greatly, like a boy. His arms had arisen slightly, but he let them drop onto the table as gloom came upon him. But they were still corpses. Just moving corpses. It took many people to confirm it. And more was needed to build a great host. A body as grand as the amygdala. Henriette drew her breath, but Caddock held out an arm that stopped whatever verbal outburst she was preparing. Then what? You said you needed a great one's brain to shine the dream onto you. Not a brain. That was not necessary, it turned out. Light would cause the body, and through its eyes, its dream would be projected like an image onto our heads. The only thing we needed was the proper lens. As it turned out, we needed to place a specific part in the brain, just behind the eyes. Cadoc's arm ached more than ever. What was that? A relic of a true Great One. A pure-blooded, physically present Great One. The cord of an infant. A cord? Mensis has a cord! He nodded calmly, despite Cadoc standing up and shouting at him. I retrieved it. It was the grandest discovery of them all, I would say. From the Thumerian Queen Yharnam herself. A nihil. He nodded again. How? Mensis managed to track down her. How did you know she had a cord? She was a divine queen. The very last, but no mention of her little one. I don't think they knew. But Micolash was a brilliant man, with incredible insight. He must have foreseen it. You know, when we found her, she was dressed in a pristine gown fit for a wedding, like a true goddess. But her hands were bound, and her child dead within her. Slain. Taking the cord was trivial. What? Although, when we took it, well, she did not like that. But when I showed it to Micolash and told him everything, he seemed sad all of a sudden. You know of the cords, Mr. Cadoc? He nodded. Sacred relics. And when you think about it, what a blessing and a curse. How come her hands have been bound? That's what he said. Brilliant, Micolash. The last queen of Thumeru did not want to be queen. She could not have chosen it. To be blessed with child. Harvested of blood. Until she could stomach it no longer. What did he do with the cord, Antal? He sobered up from his dreamily recollection, donning a disgusted grimace. They can enter the dream for all I care. Then the town will be rid of them. I just desire to clean up whatever mess they leave behind. With his fists against the table, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He saw the workshop in his mind. The doll stood there, German sitting in his chair. He opened his eyes involuntarily as a flash of pain in his left arm caused his shoulder to twitch. He looked at Henriette, who was already looking at him. 3 third chords, he said. She twisted her brow in mild confusion. He shook his head, not really knowing why he had said it out loud. Antle too seemed puzzled by his comment.
It was one such relic that conceived the hunter's dream, Henriette. I must take it from Mensis. That thing is the cause of all this madness. And stripping it from them would end it,
Antle countered.
It wouldn't stop them from taking people. They have already broken the sanctity. The cord in their hands was defiled the moment it left the mother, deprived of its purpose, to nourish that poor child. The child was dead, I tell you. Shut your mouth!
Caddock! Henriette stood and addressed him in a calming manner and a concerned expression. He ignored her.
Mensis is already cursed, and so are you. But I need to take that cord to restore its purpose.
Caddock! She shouted, forcing him to look her way, admittedly somewhat startled. What are you talking about? You both sound mad.
You don't understand. You may have seen the dream, but this is about appeasing a great one. A greater will than any of us. German himself told me so, and I failed him.
Henriette visibly reacted by the mentioning of the old man. Antal seemed apathetic to it all, likely used to not understanding arcane meanings of his surroundings. He felt himself growing weak, his legs not holding and the ache numbing his arm.
The cord does not rightfully belong to mankind. Certainly not Mensis and their vile intentions. To enter the dream. Madness. A cord of an infant won't simply grant them their wishes. We must take it from them. I will do it alone if I have to.
He looked at them both, who remained silent.
If a cord once made the hunter's dream a reality, what will it create for Mensis? A mad institution who long ago forsook their humanity in pursuit of the gods. It conceived a dream, you said?
Antal carefully asked.
You are right. They cannot be allowed to achieve their goal. Not after what they've done.
Are there still people in Yahagul? Henriette asked him.
Most likely. They are still taking them.
Then that is reason enough. They might just not succeed. But they will try until they do. But if we take the cord from them and give it to the vicar, then the church would realize the madness. Won't they? Caddock did not dispute her. In all essence, she was right. Mensis had to be stopped.
I doubt the church would do anything,
. Antal said.
A divide between the two has grown over the years. Menzies is spying on the upper echelons, as well as repelling their attempts to do the same.
What? So, they wouldn't listen?
Yahar'gul has done all in its power to hide its secrets. They wouldn't find all the evidence were they to look. Everyone in the town contributes to the facade. Below all the houses lies the truth of Yahar'gul. You will take us then.
Caddock sat back down.
The three of us infiltrate the unseen and take the cord. The church would have to act if we gave them the upper hand in this silent war.
But would you want to leave the cord with them? He looked up at her, shaking his head.
No. You'll take it into the dream. To German, on my behalf.
At the early dusk, the three stood outside a grand church shadowed by the grand cathedral. Down the slope it stood upon. It was Antle that had stopped them, hesitant to cross over the threshold of the gate. They were all dressed in a similar makeshift attire to match the Menzies hunters, although only Antle wore a helmet beneath the hood. The materials had not been hard to come by, mostly being rough brown fabric and practical outerwear with sturdy reinforced leather. The two of them waited on their defecting friend, who breathed nervously while throwing uncertain glances around the corner. Henriette eventually grew impatient with him. You all right? What are we waiting for? He shifted in place, as if having just realized he was not alone.
Nothing. Let's head inside.
They walked around the corner into an empty circular chamber, grand and high to the ceiling. Right before them was a tall gate, and in the middle was a large mirror bath. Otherwise the hall was completely void of any objects. While approaching the center, Antle had his eyes locked to the tip of the gate before them, carefully walking. He stopped at the bath, filled with a very thin layer of water.
Yes, I gather it won't matter. But perhaps I should go first, nonetheless.
They did not respond, and simply let him proceed by stepping into the bath.
You just look down here and...
He stopped his sentence, and in the next moment blurred out of existence right before their eyes. They both looked at each other. Admittedly, Caddock had been taken by surprise by what just happened, but looking upon Henriette's own mild astonishment, he recalled why the event itself felt familiar. Just like a lamp, I suppose, she said, and proceeded to step into it. She turned her head straight down to peer into the water. Huh? It's just like a different... She had started speaking while she knelt down, and never managed to finish before she vanished, similarly to Antal. When he stepped into the bath where his boots produced ripples, he saw when he looked down that the reflection within it did not match. It was like he was standing atop a window, looking down into another room. When he unconsciously leaned closer to see what it was, the image started to blur in the water, fading out until he only saw the bottom of the bath.
Good, you made it.
He heard Antal's voice and looked up to find himself in a small round room. Perhaps a tower, with arches giving view to the town around them, railed with metal fences. Antal walked towards one of the arches and down a small stair onto a larger balcony platform with a massive building next to it. He and Henriette followed him. He became aware of a singing choir somewhere, coming from several directions, as if the singers were positioned high atop the roofs. He had stopped to look out straight ahead of him at the buildings on the opposite side of the street. The two of them looked over the railed edge to see the town of Yahar'gul, being mostly a single street surrounded by grand buildings. Further down, the cobbled path descended into wide stairs, all the way up to a grand open plaza with a cathedral-like building further beyond it. They beheld the strangest statues being placed in the streets. Not unlike the common robed praying icons all around Yharnam, these seemed to be some sort of wicked mockery of the kind. As if deliberately trying to retain the same pose of reverence and prayer, they were composed of several figures fused together in a horribly monstrous fashion. It was the significant thing that held Kadok's attention for a while, until Antal pointed ahead and exclaimed,
There!
He indicated towards the grand plaza down the street. Flashes of light surged over an incomprehensible mound in its center. At the gate to the walled plaza stood a gathering of people in the hundreds, likely all the civilians of Yahar'gul. Wordlessly he set off down a narrow path on the other end of the balcony, down a set of stairs, then took a sharp turn into an open door leading to a stairwell within the building. Descending it hurriedly took them out into the street, where they stepped out all the way to look further down.
They have already begun. So where is the cord?
Again he pointed to the mound.
That there is the host body. It is already embedded. Can we retrieve it? No. I don't know. But we can topple the madman himself.
He was stopped upon hearing a strange sound none of them had anticipated to hear. The cry of a newborn, coming from somewhere ahead of them. But it sounded very clear and near, like the child would be laying in the street right in front of them. Kadok looked at Henriette, who shared his astonishment. In the next moment, the sound of wails in despair grew louder and louder all around them. Very subtle at first, but when it became the cacophony of roaring beasts, they started frantically searching for the alarming source.
What is this, Antal? The jail. The jail is in that church and stretches beneath us. Where the people are?
He nodded and started running towards the plaza. Caddock instantly followed, but his arm was grabbed by Henriette.
Wait!
He looked back accusingly at her.
What about them?
Who? She gave a frustrated sigh.
How easy you forget. Those that are suffering right this moment. Lillian's husband?
He's long dead. I must find the cord. Antal had stopped, desperately battling with himself whether he should run without them. Suddenly a cart right beside them started moving, rocking back and forth as if containing a ferocious animal. They all backed away from the sound, now having emerged within. A gibbering moan made by several mouths. The cry of the child was not persistent, but came and went in short bursts, as if the unseen child fell back into slumber. But the horribly distorted growls and roars were perpetual, along with the screams of men and women. Suddenly the cart burst open, and a terrible amalgam of bodies, like the statues, tumbled out into the street, making loud groans with several mouths, forming a single scream. It aimlessly swiped at them with all its limbs, that sometimes was an entire upper body functioning as an arm. The monstrous abomination forced them to make a decision of where to flee, as well as being an omen of what was likely to come if they did not stop whatever the School of Mensis was currently doing. Antal continued forward, vanishing down the steps of the street towards the mass of people. Henriette took off to the church beside him.
Well then, I suppose I'll finish what you've started then.
Caddock was left alone in the street with the apparition. He looked after Antal, seeing German in his mind, as if he was currently watching him from the dream. The many arms grabbed at him, forcing him back to reality, and he released his whip to swipe them away. He could see how the bodies merged, how much of them remained, petrifying him with horror, but also despair. They were not alive, for there could not be any thought behind the movement of the limbs. Each one moved as a separate entity, unfortunately attached to a single body. Just as it had assaulted him, it started moving and thrashing in another direction, as if not having seen him in the first place. In the end, one takes the first step towards madness when they choose to chase dreams over reality. The dreams the cord would fulfill were uncertain, unseen. Perhaps he was an oblivious fool that just had a simple mind that could impossibly imagine it. But he was only human, and he had been chasing ghosts and dreams for a long time. So he ran after Henriette, into a grand gathering hall where two Mensis hunters battled, a more bestial amalgam of limbs. A beast made out of human parts, having grown into a mockery of life, assaulted the two, having emerged from a descending stair. The distracted parties allowed the two of them to rush past and further beneath the building. Caddoc flew after Henriette down the curved stair, where the harrowing wails of misery bounced off the walls, passed over by the sound of bells chiming, malformed and disjointed vocal cords of the beasts trying to scream, then back to the calls of despair. She made a sharp turn in through a door, but before he could follow, an amalgam of 3 people stumbled up the stairs towards him. Having initially stumbled towards him on 3 legs, and touching with 4 arms in the curved roof, it threw itself forward. A naked, contorted heap of flesh, having fused themselves together by no coherent will, as if trying to replicate limbs and muscles from a poor recollection of a normal creature. 2 upper bodies split off from each other at the waist, and it fell forward onto its arms. One of the torsos facing him, with the arms lurched forward. It made groaning sounds, coming from a mouth he could not see. He swiped at it with his cane.
Henriette!
He shouted while he was forced to back up the steps. She appeared and drew her sword concealed on her back beneath the mantle. By cutting at its back, the top torso started squirming and twisting its arms in a way no joints would allow. It threw itself to the side in the narrow space, dragging itself along the wall to tackle her. She ducked back into the door, and Caddoc kicked at one of the legs looking the weakest. The tissue holding it together proved incredibly weak, as his kick alone broke the leg. Yet it managed to stay upright, with only a stumble. But within that distraction, he managed to push himself past after Henriette. When she saw him enter, she quickly turned, and they proceeded to run through a narrow corridor, emerging into a room with barred walls creating cages with people inside, stunned by fear. While she ran into the room, he turned around to ascertain the status of the creature. It was reaching in through the door, but did not evidently fit. He turned back and saw Henriette prying open the gate of the left cage with her sword. When he reached the right cage door, Caddoc pierced the tip of the blade cane into the lock. After jamming it around, he had destroyed enough components so he could reach the latch and pull it out, opening the door. Inside was an elderly woman and 2 men, one very young and the other early middle-aged.
Watch yourself. Follow us and we'll get you out.
They remained within the cage, indecisive and petrified by all the sounds around them. He looked over and saw Henriette in the process of shuffling out 4 people from the other cage. Caddoc hastily walked over to a door at the end of the room. Peeking inside, he saw an indescribable body at the far end wall, sitting hunched over one of those giant robed men. Whatever it was doing caused the body to jerk around periodically, as well as keeping it sufficiently occupied not to have noticed him. He went back and held his finger in front of his mouth towards the three people, as well as Henriette. When she saw him, he pointed towards the door and mouthed, "Beast." He motioned for the three to come out. Henriette came up and spoke as slowly as she could amidst the chaos of sound.
"What do we do? There must be more of them."
He looked at each of their faces. Some of them looked back with wide eyes. Others looked away to the floor, eyes equally enlarged with terror.
"You leave with these ones. We can't be running around with people in tow. Get them out. Then come back if you can."
"No, I should stay. You don't dream."
"It won't matter. If you should throw down your life for someone, it should be for them. I'll look downstairs. Let's gather in the entry chamber on the overlook."
"I'll send them out. Then come right back. I promise."
He nodded and darted over to the corner of the doorway.
"Let me clear the way first,"
he said, before throwing himself around the corner. The monster was gone. It was silent up the steps, and when he looked to see, the hall lay empty. He rushed back down, past the opening and along the curving stair deeper into the jail. He emerged into another much larger room with cells like before. One was open. Bodies lay on the floor, torn to shreds. Within one was a massive quadrupedal amalgam that constantly threw itself against the bars, causing them to bend but remain in place. The murmuring apparition from before was meandering down the path between the cages. The cry of the child startled him, but quieted down, fading out into soft breathing as he fallen back asleep. He carefully stepped into the room. The creature did evidently not hear him, and the one in the cage continued to make a ruckus, making horrible loud noises from a perpetual open maw, capable only of basal roars. A man then ran around the corner at the end of the room and stopped upon seeing the creature. He was one of the sinister hunters with the hood, and further behind him came a disheveled-looking older man in a long overcoat, who immediately turned his heels when he saw what was in the room. The hunter advanced towards the tall figure, who fell forward and crawled towards him. The man attacked with a massive axe and made short work of the thing by simply cutting straight down as it came.
"Ah, you!"
he called out to Caddock, who started walking towards him. The man lowered his axe, but when he was close enough, Caddock separated the blade into the serrated wire and whipped at the man while tugging at the handle to start the spin. The initial hit he was able to endure and managed to dodge the second. He extended the handle of the axe, but right as he was about to step towards him, the bars gave out and the bestial amalgam came down onto the hunter, lodging him beneath his weight. There it started to reave and claw like it was digging a hole into the hunter's body, spilling blood with each vicious stroke. Caddock was only left stunned by the surprise for a few seconds before he whipped again at its back. It stood up on its hind legs, screaming that basal irregular scream, like the throat was being partially flooded with water. He swiped down again and backed slightly to get enough room so he could swing the whip around to charge up the spin. The first attack tore into its body, peeling away the skin, but no blood came. It moved freakishly, and its legs seemed to give way beneath it, causing it to fall randomly. But it quickly started to crawl its way towards him over the floor. The whip came back around, and when he swung with the full might of the swing, he had to leap aside as it came upon him, slashing diagonally downward, causing the serrated wire to crash into its back and quickly cutting clean through the part most resembling its waist. Blood exploded from its torso, and a mass of flesh seemed to fall apart as it landed on the floor. He rushed ahead towards the door the hunter had come from. There was a smaller room with a large stairwell beside it. Further down it was a narrow corridor with smaller cells fit for only 1 or 2 persons. At the end of the hall cowered the man he had sighted before. In the reprieve the underground gave from the cacophony above, Caddock noticed just how loud his own breaths were. He pushed shut barred doors on his way, carefully looking in each one as he passed. Somewhere he still heard that cry, but otherwise he only heard his own footsteps and the sniveling sounds of the man he was walking straight towards. He gripped tight of his cane the closer he got, but became distracted when something moved in the cell right next to him. A small figure was sitting with its back turned to him with a blanket over it. From the very faint sobs, he could tell it was a little girl. He threw a glance at the man, who had looked up at him, but hid his face in fear when their eyes met. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. He plunged the cane tip into the ground right beside the man, who made a piteous sound as his body jumped. He forcefully grabbed his hand and threw it aside.
No, don't, no, please.
He patted his coat pocket and felt the keychain that he took. He stood and tried one out, then another, then found the one that fit. The man continued to look up at him as he calmly stepped inside, strapping the cane to his belt.
There now. I'll take you away now. Would you look at me?
The head slowly turned, and he saw a teary eye peer out at him from under the blanket. Blonde hair obscuring the other eye.
I'm no beast. I'll take you out. But you must not look. Is that all right?
She kept looking at him like a frightened animal. Little emotions to her, save for that primal alertness. But she did not protest when he stepped closer. He took her in his arms, and when he was about to stand up, he felt a flash of pain in his left arm. He grunted, making her gasp and become tense.
It's nothing. Don't worry.
He took a moment. The pain faded, and he could stand up unhindered, carrying her with both arms effortlessly. He pulled the blanket over her face, and guided it with his left hand into his chest, safe from the nightmare around them as they left the jail. Edgar looked carefully at the unconscious man's haircut. He decided the angle was off and propped him up against the wall of the basement. He placed a tiny mirror on an abandoned shelf and with the smallest comb began styling his hair in his victim's image. His matching hair was made into the spitting image to that of his unconscious friend. Having stolen essentially everything he wore, Edgar only left behind his pair of glasses, donning a set of his own with fake lenses. He exited the basement, making his way through empty corridors to the seance hall without any encounters. He scurried inside from a back door. The scholars had mostly taken their seats, and he moved to the highest stage. He was hoping there was no assigned placements on the elevated seating rows, as that information had not been managed to be acquired. Platforms ran along the walls of the rectangular room, save for the entry wall, with scholars finding their seats. He took a chair and sat down in between two men that looked more focused on themselves inside their head cages to notice him. Their eyes were shut, and one muttered something like a chant under his breath. After a moment of just sitting, two men came up with a cage and sat it atop his head. There was no particular restraining mechanism. In fact, he could easily have unlocked the thing himself by removing the latch. A feature that appeared quite interesting. By now every seat was taken, and only the two assistants toured around the platforms to address those with cages. He was not worried about any form of contributions, as their intelligence told only of unseen conductors of the menses ritual, seldom being the attendants' own doing. He would like to discover the exact method, if it perhaps had something to do with the chanting. A round window in the ceiling above the entrance opened as the door closed. Daylight entered, but was then shifted as something was pulled before the window, making the light slightly less bright and the room somewhat murky. Then there was silence. He paid close attention to Micolash in the center seat, appearing as if asleep. He was mostly in anticipation for any cue that he would have to mimic. But nothing happened, so he simply sat still in his seat, discreetly looking around at the scholars, who either had their eyes shut or stared blindly in front of them. It took so long for anything to happen that Edgar was able to almost convince himself that Menzies was mad all along, and their work had never been as promising as it had appeared. When something eventually did happen, he became excited, not because of the nature of the event, but that something at all broke the idle wait. The light coming from the window changed. It started growing faintly blue and flickering, like a fire. That kind of unsteady and shifting glow. Although it was quicker, and the maces wielded by those nocturnal hunters came to mind. Then nothing continued to happen until he heard a very misplaced sound of a baby's cry. A very quick burst, right beside him. He stopped himself from looking, as no one else appeared to have heard it. The ominous chanting continued, but now he thought to start making out more sounds, such as bells chiming. The soundscape became more alive, with a distant murmur. Voices, perhaps. The ritual continued undisturbed, beside several things, evidently transpiring outside in the street. Then a light came into existence above the provost's head cage. A reddish light with dark hues. Immediately upon its emergence, the infant's cry was heard again, but now with a greater sense of distress to it. It sounded uneasy, like hungry or tired. The light began to grow into a sphere of incredible and cosmic darkness within. Was this, too, a way into the cosmic expanse? It did strike Edgar as a portal of sorts, as it bore a frame of arcane power with a foreign presence. The cry of the infant grew louder and seemed to echo through the room, until the sound was a cacophony of overlapping cries, while the orb slowly grew. Then the doors swung open, and a man dressed like the vile, nightly kidnappers rushed in, hollering the provost's name. With the arcane orb present, the invader hesitated to approach the man, who had not reacted to him entering. He drew a pistol and fired at the thing, but to no avail. Like everyone and everything, Edgar was forced to disregard the man's strange interference. His bullets did not seem to halt the escalating screams and the growing orb. Screams and voices from outside grew as well. The man turned around and fired up at the glass window. If he ever hit his mark, Edgar was never able to observe. He felt for a second as if he was drawn forward and was suddenly standing somewhere else. He looked around curiously, wondering if what he saw was true. He and many others stood in a library, a very neatly kept one. He heard murmurs coming from afar. Somewhere else, in the same room amongst the shelves. At first he was utterly absorbed with every detail of his surroundings, and had to focus his entire will to recall why he was there. Simply put, he recalled the purpose of gathering information on Menzies. But how had he ended up in the present room? He had been sitting down, somewhere else. Then he recalled watching how the orb had exploded forcefully. Then he was here. He suddenly felt nauseous, and his legs gave way. He felt weak and keeled over. clutching at the latch to undo the head cage. It fell off him as he was bent over and he was about to vomit. The sensation was like he could feel his body and mind move separately, as if he was about to split apart and lucidly retain control of both. He fumbled for his pocket and retrieved the special treated sedatives, which he instantly consumed. His mind once more appeared attuned to his vessel, and he slowly regained his bearings. Looking around, the scholars of Mensis had started to meander about, peering idly at the volumes. Micolash, the provost and spearhead of the ritual, stood still among his peers. He looked curiously at Edgar, then looked upwards inside his head cage. He breathed in greedily as his hands rose to the ceiling. Ah, finally. He lowered them. The scholars all had a sudden lethargy come over them, each one in their own different way. He observed most appearing as if debilitated by some underlying sickness suddenly catching them. Some sank to the floor and remained writhing around like they pretended to be a worm. Others started to mutter to themselves incoherently while aimlessly drifting away. One seemed to die, standing upright for no apparent reason, simply having his legs folding beneath him and falling over to become still on the floor. Among each of the uniquely afflicted scholars, Micolash remained untouched. He walked with the same control as one would suspect. The cry of an infant came into his ears, like it was very close, but all around him. Edgar made it onto his feet, still feeling like his mind was dulled by his recollection. He had to acknowledge in his mind when taking a step, like the process had ceased to be an automatic thought process. He walked about for a moment, imagining him looking like the rest, most of which had their faculties diminish more and more until they became limp on the ground. But he managed to formulate a pattern of thought, so it was made fairly agreeable until it seemed to naturally integrate itself back to normal thought patterns. Micolash did not even acknowledge the presence of anyone. His eyes were constantly locked at something far away, beyond the individuals. Once more the cry was heard. Oh, yes. Let's see now. Where are you? Micolash said to himself and started to wander away. Edgar took note of how their surroundings had just started to grow older. Cobwebs were formed in an instant, and the wood was greyed and decrepit in the blink of an eye. It had previously appeared very pleasant and neatly organized, only to now take on a ghastly, neglected appearance. He was rattled by a loud wailing scream, like a siren. It was clearly made by some strange and foul vocal cord. It was a sickening, high-pitched exclamation in wordless agony. It attracted some of the scholars who started to shuffle their way to an exitway. Edgar looked to see Micolash, unaffected by the distant sound, walk casually up towards a stair, further into the library. "Oh, I hear you. Come now. Let us speak." Then he vanished behind a corner. Edgar decided to look about the exit where some scholars had left for. He found himself outside. A colossal cathedral lay on a cliffside in front of him. A bridge merged the structures afore him with an equally grand cathedral castle, which he found himself in. Dark clouds had gathered and now swirled in the sky, thick, ominous and impenetrable. But an immense moon still hung in its full form and glory over the clouds. Despite the brightly shining moon, the land was dark as in the night. Mountain ranges spanned the horizon of a misty landscape. A light from the opposite direction of the moon intruded upon the sky with a ghastly orange glow. He turned hastily towards the bridge. In a tower, centered between the structures in the middle of the bridge, out from archways, came rays of sinister light. His mind was assaulted by an immaterial, ghostly sigh. Scholars had walked like dull sheeps out on the lower bridge, right under the tower with the arching chamber. The light focused on them each. As it did, phantasmal spears, be them illusions or not, appeared to stab at them. It would look like a horrible and painful death, had it not overcome them as quickly as it did. The light would simply touch them, and they would perish where they stood. Each perished with haste, until it reached Edgar. He was overcome by pain, and he felt his body and mind being violently torn from one another, hurled around in place by a will invading his own, that possessed a higher stature and abided not by the same laws as he did. He had the awareness to throw himself backwards, through the doorway he had come from. Where he lay, he consumed another full vial of the choir's sedative. Shakily, he picked himself up and found a door that he could close, shutting out the horrible looming light. In its keyhole was fortunately a key in place, which he locked and took upon his person. The cry of an infant was heard once more. He deemed its origin to come from up high, maybe the upper reaches of the cathedral. The scholars were all out of sight. So too was Micolash, though he could still hear the man from somewhere in between the shelves. I have so much on my mind, laid bare. Yet you have so much more for me, O Great One. He ignored the mad provost and ascended the stairs up into the library, looking for a way higher up into the nightmare of Mensis. The sky had taken on foreign hues when Caddock came out with a girl in his arms. While still keeping her sight obscured with a hand on the back of her head facing his shoulder, he saw an accursed sky of violet hues, while a red moon illuminated the town of Yahar'gul. Corpses of the amalgamated creatures lay in the street, and people ran terrified away from the plaza that still sparked with light around a freakish, fleshy mound. He started running in the same direction as them, away from the plaza. They had not yet reached where he had emerged, and it was a panic further down of people trying to get away. Some around him had succumbed to the sight and had fallen to their knees, facing the moon and arms held up in prayer. The scream of that poor and unseen child grew in volume and became more distressed. It echoed in and out all around him, and the girl in his arms started to snivel and moan with terror. He continued to run, passing people doing the same. All the sound of the bells and that scream made his mind incapable of any thought outside of his intention of getting as far away from the madness happening at the plaza. When the scream was so loud it was about to affect him physically, the bells stopped and everything became silent for a second. Then a violent roar furiously exploded like a shrieking wind erupted behind him. He saw how a massive bright red light had engulfed the building before the plaza and eradicated the thing in its center. The sparks vanished and the contraptions surrounding it toppled. He turned and ran even faster. He tightened the grip around the girl as he ran quicker and quicker, pushing himself away from a sound growing furiously behind him, larger and nearer. At the end of the street lay a massive wall with a gate, seemingly having been walled up with bricks. He continued to run, then felt a violent push, throwing him forward several feet. He managed to turn himself around in the fall, so he landed on the steps leading up to the structure on his back. The air escaped him, and he was left lying staring up into the sky with violet clouds, shrouded with crimson hues of a bloody moon. Down the street, the explosion had left each of the structures intact, but the people had gone. A new phenomena started to play over the heavens, while all the sounds grew fainter and fainter, just like watching gentle waves moving back and forth on the ocean from below. He saw the exact same emotions dance over the sky, right above the rooftops. With each motion, the sounds vanished, and the violet color was drained. The sky began to shine once more with the orange and approaching colors of blue that was the descending dusk. The color of the moon faded as well. It simply started to disappear entirely from where he had once seen it, as a terrible open eye right in front of those tainted clouds. When all was quiet and he lay alone on the steps, the girl shiveringly turned up her face to look at him. He could not tear his eyes from the normal moon, and she eventually moved her head to look upon it as well. There they lay watching, a nightmare having been washed away, with both their breathing growing slower and calmer, breathing along with the fading currents of the ocean right above their heads.
Moon. A secret symbol left by Caril, runesmith of Bergenworth. A transcription of moon as spoken by the great ones inhabiting the nightmare. Gain more blood echoes. The great ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in spirit and often answer when called upon.